By 1983, it's estimated that 1 out of every 5 American homes had one of these, the Atari CX-40 joystick. The very image of this controller, the dashed orange lines and the big red fire button, have become a universally accepted icon for 80s nostalgia in general and retro gaming in particular. Except, this isn't a CX-40. This is a CX-10. During the very first year of production, from 77 to 78, the Atari VCS shipped with their first iteration of the controller that would eventually evolve into the CX-40. So, how does this early version compare to the one we all know and love? And why the redesign? That's what I'll explore in this video right after this. This video brought to you in part by Tommy in the Order of Cosmic Champions. This exciting and heartwarming coming-of-age Gen X novel is available now. Check the link for more info. Hey there, welcome back to GenXGrownUp. I'm John, and I am a Gen X grown-up. Thank you for clicking on this video. The more I researched the differences between the CX-10 and the CX-40, the more I came to understand the reason for that redesign. I found the general consensus to be that the CX-10 is primarily desirable as a collectible, not as the controller of choice. Users cite the internal design of the CX-10 as requiring more effort to perform commands. And as it turns out, not only is the CX-10 harder to play with, but the complexity of its internal design made it quite expensive to produce at volume. That's why in 1978, Atari engineer James Asher was tasked with revisiting Steve Bristow's original design to simplify the internals, improve responsiveness, and lower the cost of manufacturing. His new design, branded the CX-40, went virtually unchanged for the remainder of the run of the Atari 2600 and beyond. So, having just added a couple of these 1977 CX-10 sticks to my collection, seemed like the perfect time to break them down, compare them, and see what all the fuss is about. Let's head to the table. Here are the two controllers in question, side by side. Now, this is one of my CX-10s. I just recently got 2 of these in a 1977 Sears Telegames video arcade. Hadn't had one of these before. Really good condition. Look how bright the paint is on it. And this is one of my old CX-40s. Now, most of my CX-40s have most of the paint rubbed off here, lovingly used. But I wanted to first look at an overview of the externals, what is different about them externally when you're just looking at them. There are 3 or 4 cosmetic things that you can quickly use to identify a CX-10 versus a CX-40. So here on the CX-40, there's this familiar word top at the northern position on the joystick, where on the CX-10, there was no such notation. It was just dash line all the way around. The next is how the boot is seated at the bottom of the stick. You'll notice in the CX-40, the boot stops and there's this hard plastic ring that has the same texture as the rest of the joystick. Whereas on the CX-10, the boot extends all the way to the edge here. And you can even see little tabs where it's held in place. So that's slightly different as well. The next item is the CX-40 has a flat top to the joystick boot here, where the CX-10 has this little indentation. Can you see a little lip, a little ridge around there? That's because initially there was a little metal badge in there that either said Atari or Sears, depending on where you bought your Atari. They're usually missing. Apparently the glue was not great, and there's some debate about whether or not every CX-10 had them, but certainly they were all designed with the indent for one of those. And in fact, if you find a CX-10 with that little thing included, that increases the value. And then finally, I'll call your attention to the button here. Now, I'm not talking about the slight variation in color. I'll attribute that to the years. But if you look at the CX-10 on the left, that button sits quite a bit taller above the flush mount of the base of the stick, maybe 1.5 or 2 times taller. Yeah, I'm gonna guess that's because of the spring that's in the CX-10. We'll find out. Now, looking at the bottom, a less obvious giveaway of the CX-10 versus the CX-40. Look how deep the screws are in the bottom of the CX-40, because there's not much internal, there's not much guts in there. Whereas the 10, these screws are right at the top edge, because there's so much more there's a plate and some springs and all that stuff in there. So those are several ways that you can identify a CX-40 from a CX-10 just at a glance. All right, enough of the internals. Let's get these things torn apart and take a look at the guts. In case you've never seen one before, this is a dismantled Atari CX-40 joystick. And the design, the simplicity, is absolutely genius. It's a little cheap, but it's also, as we said, easier and less expensive to produce at scale, and therefore That's why they became so ubiquitous. So we have this little central shaft here that goes up inside of this boot. Around the perimeter of the shaft are these 4 little nubs, 1, 2, 3, 4, north, south, east, and west, that when you lean the joystick, it depresses the button inside of the bottom of the stick. So you can imagine, when assembled, this little divot at the bottom of that stick sits on that little peg with the board under it. So here it is oriented, and when you lean it, it's going to push that little dome down that's going to make a connection. And speaking of that little dome, here is the cheap simplicity. And you can see the tape is lifting on mine. It probably needs to be serviced. It's fun. Back in the day, I had a bucket of parts of CX-40s that I would use to repair my joysticks or my buddies in the neighborhood. And these are the wires coming in from your controller. There are all of the used pins. And all we have is open circuits. And when you push down, this is a little dome, and it touches between that signal and completes a circuit and tells the controller you've either moved in a direction or you've pushed this button. Now what happens is this tape lifts, as you can see here. The little domes can slide around a little bit. And ultimately, you can replace those by just peeling the tape off, putting them in position, and putting like packing tape over it. Pretty much is all that it takes, and you're right back in business. How do I know? Again, I've rebuilt a bunch of these over the years. So with this kind of simplicity, it's no wonder that this joystick was mass marketed and widely available, easy to pick up on the secondary market, easy to pick up on the tertiary market. They're just really cheap, inexpensive, and they work. They just work. And when they break, they're easy to fix. Okay, how about that CX-10? Now, I've never seen the inside of a CX-10 joystick myself in person. I'm aware from what I've seen online, there's a lot more in it, so let's find out. Oh, look at all that. Look at this assembly. There's more to dismantle. Look at that. The other one just pretty much fell apart when you opened it. Before I even take this board off, let's take a look at what's going on here. You can see the spring in there. Very different central shaft and assembly, and it's pushing these springs. And I guess beneath there is the connection. Look at that. That's quite different. Joystick button, probably similar? Yeah, that's why it's such a long throw. Yeah, look at there. Huh. All right, let's get this off. See. Oh, there's so many moving parts here. There's a board. Look at this plate. There's a whole plate here. Okay. So there's this whole plate above it, and there's all the springs below. So I'm going to assume I can remove this central. Yeah, very similar. Very similar. So this is the CX-10. Here's the CX-40's internal. Not all that different, except this one has to accommodate these springs on the bottom. You can even compare the push buttons. Look, the one from the CX-10 is multi-tiered and it has the spring affixed. This one also uses a spring, but it's little, it falls right out. And not only is it a bigger construction, but look how much it's a little bit larger. The diameter of the top part of the button is a little bit bigger too. So bigger button, longer throw as well. Now you've got to look at just how much more complex this CX-10 is. So first, more parts. There's this plate, there's all these springs, the bigger button. So this lives inside of there. We'll clean that up in a second. When you move it, it's going to push these springs. Those springs are mounted onto this plate. This plate has little flexible arms on it under each of the directionals and the button, so that when you lean the stick or press the button, it bends that little arm. And when you bend it, you can see there's a little bit of a nub on the bottom. Well, that little nub lines up directly with the PCB, but not the top of it. The bottom of it is actually what's face up, and those little nubs push these tiny buttons. See, that's a little tiny button. You're making a connection there when you lean the stick. So here's that involved sequence. Move the stick in a direction. Direction pushes a lever. Lever mounted to the PCB presses a tiny button. Button then transmits the command. This is in contrast to the one with the CX-40, where you literally lean the stick and it pushes the button. That's why it's quicker to react. That's why it's cheaper to produce. Look at all these parts that I need for the CX-10, as opposed to this for the CX-40. The plastic shaft, a board, a button, one tiny spring, and that's it. For me, it's all kind of coming into focus. Now I understand why this super simple joystick that me, a 12-year-old kid, could take apart and fix. While this one is not that much more complicated, there's a lot more stuff going on. More things can go wrong, more things to manufacture, making this heavier. And then finally, as they say, doesn't even control as well. So let me clean these up a little, put them back together, and give them a test drive before we wrap this video up. While I'm getting these sticks put back together, I want to make sure you know about our merch store. We have cool and creative designs for just about any nerdy thing you're into, available on shirts, stickers, mugs, phone cases, and more. If you click over to GenXGrownUp.com/merch the next time you're in the market, I'm sure you'll find something right for you, and proceeds from every purchase goes to support the next Gen X Grown Up video like this one. Okay, let's get back to the joysticks. To try them out, I've just fired up my Atari 2600 Plus, and this is a CX-40 style stick. This is actually the Plus that included with the 2600 Plus, and I'm just going to jump in and quickly play something we're accustomed to, and just observe how far you have to lean the stick to get a reaction. And you can see that. We'll grab the key here. Let's come down. So as I lean left and lean right, just a little bit, little tap on the button. Yeah, so we have good navigation here, and you can see how much I'm leaning the stick. Now let's switch over to that CX-10. This is the very CX-10 we just tore apart and took a look at. So if you can see that it's a little uneven, so I have to push farther up. Down is easier. Up, there we go. It's farther. I mean, maybe you could tune that based on the springs or the position of stuff inside. Yeah, and the button, it's quite a ways farther. We're going to push this button down a little as nothing. You got to go all the way down to make connection there. Yeah. You know, I understand. I noticed this even when I first took a look at my 1977 telegames, that these joysticks felt like they required more work. And it turns out, now we know why it takes so much more work, and we know why it was redesigned into the CX-40. Today, you can pick up a used CX-10 for between $30 to $75, depending on condition. As we talked about at the beginning of this video and observed in our testing, it's probably not going to be your go-to 9-pin game controller, but if you're an Atari collector or enthusiast, you might just need one on the shelf so you can say you've got it. That's pretty much the rationale I use most of the time. Look, I'm going to throw some links over my shoulders here and here to some other Atari videos I've done recently. I certainly hope you found something to enjoy in this video, and I can't wait to talk to you again next time. Bye-bye.